You know, it's been a long time since I've been excited for anything Transformers-wise, and then Skybound came along and, well, blew my mind, and everyone else's mind, and has made it impossible to actually find the comics in my area because everyone's buying them. And I figure, hey, I like Transformers, I like comics, I like talking about toys. Why don't we do a video where we literally just go over which are the best figures if you want to make your own Skybound Transformer shelf? I'm not gonna lie, a big part of why I'm doing this video is because my Legion of Doom video did so well last year. It is still one of my most popular videos, it's one I'm very proud of, and I figure this is as good a time as any to kind of recreate the magic, talk about a different thing I really enjoy. Alongside that, the Skybound Transformers comics are great. Here's the thing, right? I love IDW, but IDW's designs were wholly unique and stylized, and not all those designs ever got figures. Hell, not all those characters ever got figures. Skybound, meanwhile, are sticking true to the original G1 characters and their designs, meaning it's much easier to actually build a Skybound shelf, if that is what you want to do. Keep in mind, we also have a pretty small core cast right now, so it wouldn't be that financially draining as long as you knew where to look. The whole point of this video is I want to go over the main characters, what figures I think would be excellent choices if you want to make a shelf, and my personal pick as to who I go with. I'm also going to point out that I am looking at the classics / universe / generation scale. So not Masterpiece, not Legends, these are the guys that you could go into a store and pick up off the shelf right now, or at least you could have within recent memory. Those are my only real directions. We're going to go over the Autobots first, then the Decepticons, and then at the end we'll do a speed round of all the one-off characters that have shown up for just a little bit. Optimus Prime, leader of the Autobots, face of the franchise, one of the most famous fictional characters ever. He has no shortage of toys. So if we're looking at the classic scale, Optimus ideally needs to be Voyager or Leader sized, which is to say they need to be bigger than the vast majority of Transformers. With that in mind, one of the greatest versions of Prime has always been the classics Optimus. For a long time, this was people's main Optimus in their collections. That said, it's of course very stylized, not exactly what you're looking for if you want a completely screen-accurate Optimus. Alongside that, you could go with maybe the Siege Optimus. This is a Cybertronian mode, there's some extra bits and bobs on the limbs, but this Optimus is still pretty screen-accurate and is a bit cheaper if you're just wanting to pick up a nice, easy collection. However, my personal pick, and this is a bit obvious, I have to admit, would be the Earthrise Optimus. This Optimus has been released many times. It was released in Earthrise, it was released in Kingdom, it was released in the Netflix Walmart waves, I'm pretty sure it's been released in Legacy again. You can still get this guy for around retail price. You'll get the trailer, you'll get the combat deck, and you get one of the best looking Optimuses ever made. If you just want a good, affordable, cartoon-styled Optimus to lead your Skybound Autobots, this is the greatest one. His articulation is on point, his sculpting is wonderful, his colors are great. There's not many issues you can really take with this Optimus. Though keep in mind, Classics Optimus, Siege Optimus. These are great options if you want something a little bit different or a little bit cheaper, or maybe you're just not big on the trailer. 3 really good options. Earthrise is my personal pick though. Next up is Ratchet, the medic of the Autobots, Optimus's oldest friend, and a bit of a grouch to say the least. Ratchet is very different from Optimus. He does not have many figures, and a lot of them aren't very good. If you look back to Universe 2.0, that figure is infamous for being, well, terrible. We have to go all the way to Siege before we get an even good Ratchet, but this Ratchet is outrageously expensive now due to being a Walgreens exclusive. There was an Earthrise Ratchet, which is also outrageously expensive now due to being an Amazon exclusive. In all honesty, unlike Optimus, there's only one good pick I could give you for Ratchet, and that is get the Studio Series 86 Ratchet. This Ratchet is still on shelves in my area. He's still online for affordable prices. He is a wonderful looking Ratchet that meshes incredibly well with especially the Earthrise Optimus, and he is a near perfect depiction of the cartoon design. This is without a doubt the best Ratchet for this shelf. The first Autobot Ratchet brought back online was, of course, Cliffjumper, and by the way, I saw someone point this out the other day. The reason why he probably put Cliffjumper back online is he was the smallest Autobot, and thus he would take the least amount of energy, which is really smart, and I love that as an explanation. Cliffjumper is similar to Ratchet. He doesn't have many figures, which is insane considering how many Bumblebees are out there. You have the Classics Cliffjumper, which is very, very, very good. The only issue is that he's a bit too big. It would kind of throw off the scaling here. Alongside that, you would have the Thrilling 30 Cliffjumper, which is weirdly expensive now and also way too small. Kind of like Ratchet, I think there's only one real answer as to who you should go with, and that is the Earthrise Cliffjumper. He has the right vehicle mode, he looks great, and he's still decently affordable because he was a Wave 1 Earthrise guy. They kind of cluttered up the place after a bit. So, now you have the first 3 Autobots well and truly taken care of. That just leaves the second half of the team. Despite not being advertised, after Cliffjumper, the next Autobot to come back online was Jazz. Jazz is a massive fan favorite, and despite that, he doesn't have many figures, at least not the G1 version of him. A big part of that seems to be the fact that, for whatever reason, Porsche just didn't like working with Hasbro for a very long time. Even still, there are some great standouts. There's the Power of the Primes Jazz, which is terrible. There's the Studio Series Jazz, which I think is terrible, but a lot of people seem to like. There is the wonderful, wonderful Generations Special Operations Jazz, but that's not entirely accurate. For me, what I always used was the Origins Jazz, Target exclusive, but still looks perfect, very screen accurate to Jazz. The vehicle mode is, of course, a big, doofy space car, but that doesn't matter. This Jazz is super well articulated, looks perfect. It is exactly what I want from a G1 Jazz, and thus it's exactly what I want from a Skybound Jazz. They're my personal pick for the shelf, even though if I had to give an alternative, I would very much recommend the Generations Special Ops Jazz. We'll follow that up with RC, the first Autobot that Optimus specifically wanted to bring back online, and also, just to throw this out here, my 3 favorite Autobots are Optimus, Ratchet, and RC. I don't know why, they just kind of are. RC has a lot of figures that are very samey. They kind of figured out how to do the transformation and then never tried anything different. The 3 big contenders would be the Thrilling 30 RC, the Earthrise RC, and the Studio Series 86 RC. I think all 3 are perfectly valid, great examples of the character. I'll point out Earthrise RC, not really that great a figure, nor do they really transform. I would personally leave them by the wayside. I would honestly say go with Studio Series, just because they're more recent and a little bit more accurate. The Thrilling 30 is honestly the better playing figure. It's just their limbs are a little bit too stick-like that they kind of fixed on the Studio Series, but even there the proportions are a little bit weird. At the end of the day, RC is going to be a mixed bag, unfortunately, just because the design straight up just was not meant to be a toy, and thus never was in the G1 days. I would still personally go with Studio Series. That just leaves us with Wheeljack, and Wheeljack has quite a few options actually. So you have Generations Wheeljack, and then fast forwarding just a bit, you have Earthrise Wheeljack. We have the newly released Cybertronian Wheeljack, and then you have the Authentics Wheeljack, which would be a bit large, but does kind of fit the niche if you'd want to go for a bigger Wheeljack. Now, keep in mind, in the comics right now, he doesn't have any legs. Technically, all these figures, you could take the legs off them using the ball joints, but I'm not going to take that too much into consideration. I'm more or less just wasting time. The answer is go with the Earthrise Wheeljack. The Cybertron Wheeljack looks fine, but it's in a 5-pack, and it has characters that you might not care about if you're just wanting to do Skybound. The Authentics Wheeljack is great, but it's a bit too big. And then Generations Wheeljack is just a bit too bloated, too much of a product of its time, and it's like 10 years old at this point. I would really just recommend go with Earthrise Wheeljack. It got a re-release in Kingdom. It's a good figure. That's all of our Autobots out of the way. Now we can go over to our main Decepticons. The initial Decepticon team was Starscream, Skywarp, Soundwave, Rumble, Ravage, and Laserbeak. Eventually, they added on Thundercracker, Reflector, and the Constructicons. They still haven't had Megatron join the main cast yet. He's over in the Cover Commander comic book. But even still, the Decepticons are way more numerous. And there's a few more issues with them just due to figures not being available, figures being out of scale, and figures that we know are just around the corner in terms of being re-released or made into entirely new figures. So bear with me, we're going to try our best to figure out the best way to do this team up, starting with Starscream. Starscream was the leader of the Decepticons for the first 7 issues, and he is also, well, quite frankly, the most interesting one to talk about. He's had so many great figures over the year, much like Optimus. You have the classic Starscream, which still stands the test of time, and is possibly the single most popular mold ever made for Transformers. Fast forwarding just a bit, you could do something like the Leader Class Combiner Wars Starscream. Or you could potentially go with something like the Power of the Prime Starscream if you want something a little bit more unique. My ultimate vote really does come to the War for Cybertron trilogy. You have the Siege Cybertronian Starscream, the Earthrise Earth Mode Starscream. Yeah, it's kind of obvious where I'm going between all these. It's going to be the Earthrise Earth Mode Starscream. It's one of the easier ones to still get. It looks spectacular. It has so much options when it comes to posability. And it's a recreation of the classic Starscream, which was already one of the best Transformers ever made. Now it's just a little bit larger, has better articulation, better detail. All that said, I still think this is the best classic/generation Starscream out there, even though there are a few that might do certain things better like articulation or detail. For my money, this is my Starscream. Right after Starscream, Teletran 1 brought Skywarp back online, and I kind of like my Seekers matching, so if Earthrise Starscream got my nod, Earthrise Skywarp is going to get my nod. I don't really like their screaming face, but at the same time, they're cheaper than the Siege Skywarp, they're bigger than the Generation Skywarp, and they're not as insanely big as the Leader Class Combiner Wars Skywarp, and they match with Starscream. That's all I need out of Skywarp. Next up is Soundwave, my favorite Decepticon, and very well possibly my favorite Transformer. There are so many great options for Soundwave. If you're willing to spend a little bit extra money, you have the music label Soundwave, which is a working MP3 player and still an amazing looking figure. You have things like the Generations War for Cybertron Soundwave, which is my childhood Soundwave and still the main one I use for display. And then fast forward a little bit, you have things like the Titans Return Leader Class Soundwave. You have the Earthrise Soundwave, and you have the Siege Soundwave. Now, Siege Soundwave is amazing, and it was eventually re-released in Legacy without the battle damage. I think that this is a perfectly good Soundwave. Personally, I go with the Earthrise/Netflix Soundwave, which was just a remold that now turns into the boombox as opposed to the spaceship. Only issue. This Soundwave is now ridiculously expensive, and it's basically the same figure as the Siege Soundwave. So, if you just absolutely need him to turn to a tape deck, go with the Netflix, but if you just want a really good Soundwave that looks just like he did in the cartoon, go find yourself the Legacy Soundwave. He has the yellow visor, sure, he turns into a spaceship, sure, but it's still one of the best Transformer figures ever and looks absolutely perfect. I'm not going to waste too much time on the cassettes just because they usually aren't their own figures, but we'll go through them pretty quickly. For Ravage, you have things like the Universe Ravage, you have the Siege Ravage. Personally, I would go with the Universe Ravage. It's a little bit larger, a little bit more articulated. For Rumble and Frenzy, I would actually skip over Siege again and go with their Studio Series versions just because they're a little bit more accurate. But finally, we get to Laserbeak. And Laserbeak, I actually would stick with the Siege or Netflix versions because I think they're the best depictions of Laserbeak ever. Spoiler alert, but the Decepticons don't keep a very stable roster. It's not too long until Skywarp is made into parts for Teletran 1, and we get Reflector and Thundercracker to join the team. Thundercracker, we've already gone through this. Every version of Starscream and Skywarp we've talked about was repainted into Thundercracker. The one we're going to go with is the Earthrise Thundercracker because, of course it is. As for Reflector, not to be a jerk, but there's literally only one option here. It's the Siege Reflector, who is actually called Refractor, but he is Reflector in the comics. They just haven't done many other versions of this guy, and it's the best looking one. I guess you could technically insist on getting 3 for the cartoon accuracy, but in Skybound there's only the one Reflector, which means all you need to do is pick up one of this army builder for it to work. And besides, it's not exactly like Reflector stuck around for very long. That brings us to the final editions of the main cast, that being the 6 Constructicons, and I'm actually going to try to challenge myself here to see if I can name all 6 off the top of my head. I have Scrapper, Hook, Mixmaster, Long Haul, Scavenger, and Bone Crusher. There we go, all 6. I'm actually amazed I got all 6 of them. Okay, there we are. So, for them, the only real options you have, if you want all 6 and for them to be at least somewhat accurate to the cartoon and thus accurate to the comics, would be the old Combiner Wars Titan class Devastator. The only issue is that figure is ridiculously expensive nowadays and was never the best figure. But this is where I'm now going to point out that for literally the past year or so, there's been a lot of listings for a Studio Series Titan class Devastator that's going to be based off the old G1 movie. I don't know if that's ever going to come out. We of course have to take these listings with a grain of salt, but honestly I'd say wait it out, see if that Devastator ever gets announced or ever comes out, and if not, I mean, there's always going to be that Combiner Wars Devastator. So that's the entire main cast taken care of, but there's of course a lot of characters that have shown up for as many as one panel, or were here for just one issue, and then there's of course the ongoing plot that we're just now starting to see back on Cybertron. So now we're going to go over some of the lesser loved characters, starting with Jetfire, who was around for exactly one issue. Jetfire has a lot of great figures. You have the Classics one if you just want a Voyager, you have the thrilling 30 Generations Skyfire Jetfire, and then, of course, you have the Siege Jetfire. And I'm going to be honest with you, I go Siege all the way. He's way bigger than everyone else, as he should be. It's one of the best Transformer toys I've ever gotten. It's not crazy expensive yet, but it's definitely getting there. Literally, in just one panel, Beachcomr showed up in the comic, and he was dead. And if you just need Beachcomr, you have the Power of the Primes Beachcomr. You also have the Legacy Beachcomr. Personally, I'd say Legacy Beachcomr. Very much in the same boat, you have Blaster, who showed up in a flashback and died instantly, not even getting named. If you just need a Blaster, they've done the Kingdom Blaster. I believe they've either done or are about to do an 86 Blaster. Personally, I'd say just go with Kingdom Blaster. It looks perfect. It's a wonderful figure, but again, not needed for a Skybound shelf. Out of all the characters who showed up just to die, I don't think there's an argument to be made. Bumblebee was probably the most important one. He was actually name-dropped and everything, and Optimus cradles his body. Alongside that, Bumblebee is the other main franchise player of the series. So if you wanted a Bumblebee, there's actually quite a few options. So for one thing, you have the Cybertron Origins Bumblebee, which is great. Love that figure. There's the old Netflix Bumblebee, which is also very good, but getting expensive. But they literally just recently announced that they're working on a Studio Series 86 Bumblebee. Just wait for that one. It's probably going to be the best Bumblebee we ever get. But at the same time, that's just if you absolutely need a character who's already dead. We should probably talk about Megatron. He's going to eventually show up in this series. I refuse to believe he won't. And he is currently in the Cover Commander series, so it's not like he's not in this universe. Megatron's a bit tough, just because out of every main Transformer, I think he's had the most attempts at a good toy that's never really come together. There's Classics Megatron, which is great, but very different from what you'd want. There's the Combiner Wars Leader Class Megatron, which is terrible, and always has been. Titans Return Triple Changer Megatron, which was very fun and cool, but doesn't look all that great. Siege Megatron, which was not great. Earthrise Megatron, which was not great. Netflix Megatron, which at least looked good. They're doing a Studio Series Megatron. Just hold on, wait for him. But if you absolutely need one, the Megatron I personally have in my collection is the Netflix Megatron with the very nice paint job. Now we're talking about the back on Cybertron bots. So, we're going to have Elita 1, Warpath, Cup, Huffer, and Ultra Magnus. Alita 1 has actually had more figures than I remembered them to have. So they had a Power of the Primes Alita 1, which looked okay, Netflix Alita 1, which again looked fine, but not my personal favorite. My favorite Alita 1, and one of my favorite Transformers ever, is the Legacy Alita 1. I think if you just need screen accuracy, Netflix Alita 1 does look more like the one that's in the comic, but if you just want a good figure that works on a Skybound shelf, Legacy Alita 1 is a wonderful way to go. Ol' Huffer. Huffer does not have many options. There's a Combiner Wars Huffer that just doesn't look like him at all. Just go with Kingdom Huffer. A wonderful deluxe. It works for what you're going for. And by the way, I'm just tossing out there, one of my favorite deluxes of all time. I love that mold. I made a personal mission to get every version of that mold that came out, and I succeeded. Huffer is wonderful. Go with Kingdom Huffer. Keep in mind, he's a guy who showed up and then died 2 pages later. Next up, Cup. One of my favorite Autobots ever, and I'll be honest, breaks my heart that he's already gone, but at least he had a pretty cool shootout before he did. Cup has a few good options. There is the Studio Series Cup, which is going to look a lot more like the Cup from the comics, but the one I've always used is the Generations Cup. It is a very different design, but I adore this figure so much, and I think it matches the personality of Cup a lot more than the Studio Series one, so I'm going to always go with the Generations version. We're going to round out the dead trio with Warpath. There is, of course, the Kingdom Warpath, still pretty readily available, not my favorite, and we don't see much of Warpath, so honestly I'm just going to say take this as an excuse to get Generations Warpath. One of the single best Transformers ever. My personal favorite tank Transformer ever. One of the single best figures in my collection. If I had to get rid of everything and could only keep a handful of Transformers, I would keep this Warpath. It's a nothing character for this comic, but again, just take it as an excuse to get a really good Warpath. That's all I'm saying. That just leaves us with Ultra Magnus, the final Transformer to talk about for our Skybound shelf. We do have a few options. You, of course, have the Combiner Wars Leader Class Ultra Magnus, which, by the way, is the only Ultra Magnus I own because it's my favorite one. To be clear, this is an IDW Ultra Magnus. I think it still really works, and I would definitely recommend this Magnus, but it's not accurate to the comics, it's not accurate to the cartoon. You have the Siege and Kingdom Ultra Magnuses, which were never great figures, I hate to say. Now we have the Studio Series Ultra Magnus, which looks great, but again, my personal vote is always going to go back to that Combiner Wars Ultra Magnus. I think it's the best Ultra Magnus we ever got. So there we are, half an hour later, and I've given you my personal picks for what I think would make the best Skybound Transformers shelf. I want to say this again. I was more or less done with Transformers. I was looking to sell off a huge chunk of the collection, and I already did sell over half of my Transformers. But then this comic came out, and it kind of renewed my love for the entire series. After IDW closed up shop, and we got into the less great second run of IDW, with the movies never being all that good, the video games disappearing, I was losing a lot of my fandom. But I'm thankful that Skybound is around and making me excited to see these characters again. It's been a wonderful comic series. I can't wait to read more, and the thing that I love the most is how many people I'm seeing get into Transformers for the very first time, more or less just because they heard the people who did Invincible are making a Transformers comic book. It is so awesome that it's a hard time getting these issues, because that's telling me, oh my god, so many people are hopping onto this. So many people are getting these issues. So many people are posting about it and enjoying it and trying to build up their own little Skybound shelves. I hope that I can help in my own small little way, but that's my only goal with this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that Skybound just continues to knock it out of the park, and we can all enjoy some great robot-on-robot action for years to come.